عسلامة ومرحبا بكم على قناة لفا أكاديمي، القناة اللي تلقوا فيها فيديوهات تعليمية في مختلف المواد الأساسية من السنة السابعة وحتى البكالوريا. ما تنسوش زادة تدخلوا على المنصة متاعنا على العنوان اللي موجود قدامكم www.lva-academy.com، وإلا تنجموا زادة تتصلوا بنا على البريد الإلكتروني ورقم الهاتف اللي تراو فيهم قدامكم. الفيديو متاع اليوم هو فيديو خاص بمادة الإنجليزية موجه لتلاميذ السنة الثالثة troisième année tous les sections مختلف الشعب. It is a language lesson entitled Relative Pronouns and Relative Clauses. Now, before we start our lesson, we should define the word clause, which may be ambiguous to some of you. Some of you do not know the meaning of a clause. So, a clause is a group of words that might form a sentence or part of a sentence. So, a clause might be a complete sentence as it might be a part of a sentence. Why did I say part of a sentence? Because a relative clause is a dependent or a subordinate clause that cannot stand alone as a complete sentence. What does this mean? It means that the relative clause is not a complete sentence that conveys a full idea or a clear idea. It is a complement to the main clause. Now, let's take a look at the relative pronouns. Look at this table, which summarizes relative pronouns. So, if we are referring to the subject in a sentence, we use the following relative pronouns. First, we have who, then we have which, and we have that. Now, if we are referring to the object, we can use who or whom, which, and that. If we are referring to possessors, we use whose. Let's take, for example, the following sentence. The man whose house was on fire felt sad. The man whose house was on fire felt sad. Here, whose is a possessive pronoun. Also, which can be transformed into whose if we are talking about possessives. Now, some might say that we only use whose with living things, but in fact, we can use whose with inanimate objects. Now, we use relative pronouns to introduce relative clauses. So, relative pronouns introduce relative clauses. A relative clause always starts with a relative pronoun. Relative clauses tell us more about people. It might tell us about a specific person, about specific situations, and about things. Let's take a look at the following example. Jack, this is the house which Jack built. Now, this is our relative clause, which Jack built. Our relative clause here starts with the relative pronoun which. Next example. Marie Curie is the woman that discovered radio. This is our relative clause here. It starts with the relative pronoun that. Now, we use the relative pronouns who and who for people. We use them with people. Which for things, which is always used for things نستعملوها مع الجماد. That for people or things. We can use the relative pronoun that with both people and things. We also use relative clauses to give more information about a person, thing, or situation. Look at the following example. Lord Thompson, who is 76, has just retired. With this kind of relative clause, we use commas to separate it from the rest of the sentence. Look at the commas over here. So here, the relative clause who is 76 is situated between commas. Why? Because the relative clause here gives us additional information that might not be necessary, or if we ever thought about deleting this relative clause, the meaning of the sentence won't change and we will still have a complete sentence that conveys a clear idea. Now let's try reading the sentence without the relative clause, which is enclosed between commas. Lord Thompson has just retired. You see, we have a complete sentence with a clear idea. With this kind of relative clause, we use commas to separate it from the rest of the sentence. Do not forget the commas with the relative clause, which gives additional information. Now, be careful. In this kind of relative clause, we cannot use that. Look at the following example. Lord Thompson, who is 76, has just retired is a correct sentence. However, Lord Thompson, that is 76, has just retired is a wrong sentence. Here, we cannot use that. It is wrong. Also, we cannot leave out the pronoun in a relative clause. Look at the following example. We had fish and chips, which I always enjoy. This sentence is correct. However, we had fish and chips, which always enjoy, is not correct. It is wrong because here we have omitted the pronoun I, which is not correct. Now we will try to apply what we have seen in a small exercise. The exercise says, fill in the blanks with who, which, or whose. Number 1, this is the bank. Then we have the blank here, blank space. Was robbed yesterday. Now here, what shall we use? Who, which, or whose? Here we have the bank, which is not a person. So here we need to use which. This is the bank which was robbed yesterday. Number 2, a boy, then we have the blank space. Sister is in my class, was in the bank at that time. Now, here we have a boy who is a person. So, we will either use who or whose. So, here we need to use whose because we are talking about a possessive. A boy whose sister is in my class was in the bank at that time. Now, number 3, he wore a mask, and then we have the blank space, made him look like Mickey Mouse. So here we need to choose between who, which, or whose, and we have the word mask. A mask is an inanimate object, not a person, and that is why we are going to use which. So that's pretty much it. إن شاء الله تكونوا فهمتوا اللسن متاع اليوم واللي حكينا فيها على relative pronouns and relative clauses. شكرا على المشاهدة. ما تنسوش باش تدخلوا للقناة متاعنا وتتفرجوا على بقية فيديوهاتنا وفيديوهات جديدة إن شاء الله ما زالت باش تجي. ما تنسوش زادة تدخلوا على المنصة متاعنا. وباي باي، بسلامة.